Have you ever entered a room and felt something shift? The air thickens, a glance lingers. You haven't said a word, but you feel the judgment. Sometimes, it's not the loud critics you need to worry about. It's the quiet ones, the ones who smile, but shrink away. What if I told you that the reason someone dislikes you has nothing to do with you and everything to do with what you reflect back to them? Have you ever stepped into a space and immediately sensed something was off? A strange tension, a chilling stillness, as if your very presence disturbed something unspoken in the air. Before a single word escapes your lips, you feel it. Not hate exactly, but a kind of silent resistance. Cold, distant, subtle, yet unmistakably real. This is the realm of hidden resentment. And here's the hard truth. Not all hatred shouts. Some of it whispers. It hides behind tight smiles, casual glances, or a sudden change in tone. It's not always obvious, but it's there. And often it has nothing to do with who you are, and everything to do with what you represent. In this reflection, we're going to explore the invisible reasons why some people may secretly resent you, and they might never say it out loud. It's not necessarily about something you did. It could be something far deeper and much more revealing. This journey, rooted in timeless Stoic wisdom, might just change the way you view others and the way you protect your own peace. So if you've ever been confused by someone's coldness or wondered why certain people pull away when you rise, stay with me. What we're about to uncover may surprise you. Let's start with one of the most common yet poisonous forms of hidden resentment: envy and jealousy. Among all the reasons someone might quietly harbor ill feelings toward you, envy is one of the most powerful and the most corrosive. It rarely shows its face directly. Instead, it wears a mask: polite conversations, faint praise, or distant indifference. But behind that mask, something darker simmers. Sometimes admiration curdles into contempt. What once was respect slowly turns into subtle resistance. Not because you changed, but because your progress triggered something unresolved in them. You see envy as deeply personal. It emerges when someone sees in you something they secretly wish they had: your discipline, your sense of purpose, your career wins, or perhaps the quiet strength in how you carry yourself. And instead of letting that inspire them, they feel exposed. Your success becomes a mirror, and in that reflection they see their own unfulfilled dreams staring back. That discomfort, rather than being examined and understood, is often projected outward. This is when the shift begins. They might start to downplay your achievements, make little comments that question your motives, maybe even try to discredit you in subtle ways. Passive-aggressive remarks, whispered gossip, or calculated indifference become their silent weapons, not because you've done something wrong, but because your light reveals their shadow. And for some, the only way to feel less inadequate is to dim your glow. This is the true danger of envy. It turns internal frustration into external conflict. It's not always loud, but it's always destructive. And the worst part? It's rarely addressed. It just lingers in the background, turning everyday moments into emotional minefields. You may begin to wonder, did I say something wrong? Did I do something to deserve this? But the truth is often simpler and sadder. Sometimes you're hated not for your flaws, but for your light. And that says more about them than it ever will about you. In the previous part, we learned that other people's envy is not your burden to carry. And this is where Stoicism truly shines, offering clarity and strength in the midst of confusion. As Emperor Marcus Aurelius once wrote, You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Their envy is not your load to bear. Their jealousy is not a flaw you must correct. You are not responsible for how someone perceives their own sense of lack. Rather than shrinking yourself to make others feel comfortable, keep walking with integrity. You don't need to apologize for your growth, and you don't need to dim your light for someone who hasn't yet discovered their own. But stay grounded. Because resentment, when born from envy, often reveals more about the inner turmoil of the other person than it ever does about your actions. So respond, not with pride, but with poise, not with defense, but with stillness. When you realize that envy is often a reflection of pain, you can meet it with both wisdom and firm boundaries. You don't need to fix it. You only need to refuse to absorb it. By focusing on what you can control, your words, your reactions, your values, you preserve your inner peace, even when facing silent hostility. Envy may be inevitable, but letting it disturb your mind, that is not. Stay steady, stay true, and always remember, their resentment is not your responsibility. Your only task is to keep moving forward with humility, clarity, and calm strength. That is the Stoic way. But sometimes silent resentment doesn't come from envy at all. It's not always jealousy, arrogance, or betrayal that makes someone quietly turn away from you. Sometimes it's something far simpler, quieter, and often unnoticed until the damage is already done. Misunderstanding. Many tensions simmering beneath the surface of a relationship don't begin with malice, but with misalignment. One person's intention collides with another's interpretation, and from that small spark, a quiet fire of resentment begins to spread. At the root of these invisible fractures lies a failure to truly communicate, not just to speak, but to be understood. A single poorly chosen word, an untimely silence, an unintended tone or facial expression, any of these can shift how someone perceives you. Perhaps you were trying to show concern, but it came off as criticism. Perhaps you were simply quiet, but someone assumed you were distant, uninterested, or even arrogant. From a Stoic lens, perception governs all things, not just events themselves, but how they are interpreted, absorbed, and reacted to. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." And yet, most people don't pause to question their interpretations. Instead, they cling to them, build stories around them. And over time, what started as a small misreading becomes the foundation for suspicion, mistrust, or even hatred. When communication fails, not just in delivery but in reception, people begin constructing versions of you in their mind that don't reflect who you truly are, and tragically they start reacting to that imagined version of you as if it were real. Misunderstandings are rarely loud or dramatic. They grow quietly, slowly. A message left unread, a mistimed smile, a moment of silence that wasn't meant to distance, and soon the other person rewrites the story of your relationship in their mind. He doesn't care anymore. She's changed. We just spoke about hidden misunderstandings, those masks shaped more by perception than by truth. But when these misunderstandings are left unchecked, they can grow into something even more dangerous, a false story treated as reality. And one of the most common stories begins like this: "They think they're better than me." But this isn't a fact. It's a story. A story born out of uncertainty, a lack of clarity, a moment of confusion that was never resolved. And once that story takes root in someone's mind, it becomes incredibly difficult to change. Why? Because once the mind commits to a certain belief, it resists being corrected. The mind craves consistency more than truth. It prefers certainty over curiosity, and just like that, people may begin to quietly resent you, not because of something you actually did, but because of something they believe you did. In their eyes, that belief feels real. Their pain feels real. And so their judgment, though misinformed, feels completely justified. This is why poor communication is so dangerous. It doesn't just cause confusion, it creates division. As Stoics, we are called not just to master our emotions, but to refine our thoughts, to speak with precision, to express ourselves clearly, to speak with care, to listen with presence, to always assume that what we meant to say and what they heard may not be the same thing. That's why open, honest, and transparent dialogue isn't just a good habit. It's essential for maintaining harmony and trust. When things feel unclear, clarify. When you're confused, ask. And when you feel misjudged, don't rush to defend yourself. Instead, ask where the disconnect may have begun. Seneca once reminded us, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And so does the person who has grown cold toward you. They're not reacting to reality. They're reacting to their perception of you. And as long as that perception goes unchallenged, it shapes how they treat you, how they speak of you, and how they feel in your presence. That's why the remedy for resentment is not always confrontation. Sometimes it's simply the courage to reach out again, not with a shield but with sincerity, to say something as gentle as, "I feel like something's shifted between us. Would you be open to talking about it?" Of course, not everyone will meet you in that space of honesty. Some people would rather cling to the story they've built than embrace the truth you're offering. And when that happens, the Stoic path is to accept what lies beyond your control. You cannot force someone to understand you when pride is in the way. You cannot fix a bond when the other person holds tighter to resentment than to the possibility of clarity. But you can move forward in peace, knowing you didn't add to the confusion through avoidance or silence. So, if someone seems to be secretly harboring bitterness toward you, ask yourself not just what you did, but whether something may have been misunderstood. Reflect on your part with humility, not guilt. Speak with clarity, not justification. And always remember, most conflicts don't come from malice, but from miscommunication. In a world that's quick to assume and slow to ask, your effort to understand might be the very thing that turns tension back into trust. We just talked about how misunderstandings can quietly fracture relationships, but there's an even subtler truth. Sometimes your harmless difference can be perceived by others as defiance. What you simply see as a different point of view, someone else may interpret as a silent accusation. A personal choice becomes, at least in their eyes, an act of judgment. And suddenly what was just a disagreement morphs into something much deeper, a perceived threat. What follows is often not open conflict, but quiet resentment, passive-aggressive behavior, or worse, the kind of subtle hostility that leaves you wondering where things even went wrong. And no, this doesn't just happen in heated debates about politics or religion. It can show up in life's tiniest moments. When you choose discipline over indulgence, others might see it as you silently criticizing their lack of control. When you speak calmly with quiet confidence, it can unsettle those whose beliefs were never truly theirs to begin with. Even when you say nothing at all, your very presence might reflect parts of themselves they've been avoiding. And in that, reflection, people either grow or they start to pull away. Epictetus reminds us, every person is a product of their upbringing and experiences. That's not just a philosophical idea, it's a deeply practical truth, a reminder to walk through this world with humility. Because what people believe is not always a conscious decision. Often, their beliefs are shaped by their environment, by repetition, by trauma, or simply by the need to belong. And when those beliefs are challenged, even silently, it can feel like their very identity is under attack. That's why someone who seems kind and reasonable on the outside can suddenly grow distant, dismissive, or even aggressive. Not because you hurt them, but because you unintentionally mirrored something inside them they fear or resist. From a Stoic point of view, the wise path is not to argue, not to push others toward your way of thinking, but to accept. To understand that disagreement isn't always an invitation to educate. That respect doesn't require agreement. You don't have to adopt someone else's worldview. But you also don't need to prove yours is superior. The moment you realize that people hold their beliefs for reasons rooted in pain, in survival, that's the moment you stop seeing others as wrong and start seeing them as human. Still, let's be honest. Not all differences can be bridged. There will be moments when standing firm in your values might mean standing alone. Because if the price of peace is self-betrayal, then a Stoic knows that's a price not worth paying. But even as you stand firm, you can stay calm. You can disagree with dignity. You can hold your ground without needing others to bow to it. Often, when resentment surfaces in value conflicts, it's not fueled by malice, but by a failure to understand. People don't hate what's different. They hate what they don't understand. But instead of seeking understanding, they react, withdraw, or judge. That's where resentment grows, in the silence where dialogue should have been, in the assumptions that take the place of questions, in the fear that replaces curiosity. So what can you do when your values quietly create invisible enemies? You live your truth gently. You become the embodiment of what you believe without the need to declare it loudly. And you remember, no matter how clearly you speak, some people will misunderstand you because they're listening through the filter of their own wounds. In those moments, let go of the need to be accepted and root yourself in the only approval that truly matters, your own. Because as Stoics, we understand the world won't always reflect our beliefs, and that's a gift. Because where sameness breeds comfort, difference breeds growth. It teaches us patience, tolerance, and a quiet resilience that doesn't falter under scrutiny. We've just realized that differences aren't always welcomed, and misunderstandings can lead to distance or even hostility. But amid these challenges, one important truth remains. When someone hates you simply for your beliefs, remember, it says more about their insecurity than your conviction. Your role isn't to convince them to change their minds. Your role is to keep walking forward with integrity, staying true to yourself. In a divided world, choosing tolerance is a sign of inner strength. In a noisy world, listening is the mark of a true leader. And in a fearful world, living your truth without apology is a quiet revolution that can change everything. Let others misunderstand you. Let them wrestle with the discomfort of difference. You are not here to be easily understood. You are here to be authentic. And in that authenticity, you may lose some people, but you will never lose yourself. Next, let's talk about the power of rumors and gossip. One of the most quietly destructive forces out there. They don't shout, they whisper, They don't confront you face to face, but they slowly erode your reputation behind your back. Often the hatred people feel toward you doesn't come from anything you've done directly, but from stories others tell about you. Stories that may be exaggerated, twisted, or completely false. Yet once spoken, they spread faster than truth ever could. Rumors are like a slow-acting poison. They slip into conversations, change with each retelling, and before long you find yourself wearing an image of yourself you never agreed to. You become a character in someone else's story, often cast as the villain, while those listening begin to judge, distance themselves, or even resent you, without ever giving you the chance to speak for yourself. What makes gossip so powerful and dangerous is that it doesn't need to be true to be believed. It only needs to feel true. People tend to believe what fits their existing doubts, fears, or biases. In a world that thrives on speed and sensation, a whisper of scandal captivates far more than a page of facts. Gossip survives, not because it's accurate, but because it's interesting, and that alone breathes life into it. One of the most painful parts of being the target of gossip is defending yourself not against what you did, but against who people now think you are. And that version of you, pieced together from fragments and assumptions, is difficult to fight. They find that no matter how honest or sincere you are, some people have already made up their minds. You're not fighting for truth, you're fighting through fog. But this is where the Stoic path becomes your shield. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. You cannot control what others say. You cannot dictate the stories told in rooms you've never entered, but you can control your response. And in a world driven by noise, your calm integrity will be louder than any rumor. Let others speculate. Let them talk. Let them assume. Your task is not to chase every falsehood or correct every misunderstanding. That is a race with no finish line. Your task is to remain grounded in who you truly are and let the consistency of your character speak for itself. The Stoics teach us that reputation is a shadow. It follows you, but it is not you. The essence is your virtue, and no lie, no gossip can touch that unless you let it. Yes, it hurts to be misunderstood. It hurts to be judged unfairly, but a deeper pain would be abandoning your principles just to win back the approval of those who believe the worst without seeking the truth. The more you cling to what others think of you, the more power you give to their stories. But when you reclaim your focus, placing it on reason rather than rumors, that's when you truly take control. Having learned how to stand firm against gossip and understanding that deep truth always triumphs over rumors, the question arises, what do you do when you become the subject of talk? The answer is simple yet powerful. You live with even greater clarity than before. You speak with more precision and decisiveness. You behave with more dignity and calmness than ever. Because time, truth, and consistency are the true antidotes to distortion. No matter how fast lies spread, the truth moves deeper and more enduringly. It may take longer, but eventually it reaches those who truly matter. Seneca once reminded us, a good character, once established, is not easily overthrown. Those who truly know you will not be shaken by whispers, and those who are easily swayed never truly knew you at all. In the end, you lose nothing real by remaining loyal to the truth of who you are. The world will always have those who gossip. They might be the insecure seeking power or the vain seeking relevance. But you don't need to stoop down into that pit. Your discipline, your composure, and your refusal to participate, that is your resistance. That is your strength. Let them say what they will. Your silence, when rooted in integrity, is not weakness. It's a warning. It says, I do not waste my energy defending myself against shadows. So stand tall, keep your mind steady, and know this. In the long run, the one who outlasts gossip is the person who keeps showing up as themselves, day after day, unchanged, unmoved, and free. Next, let's look deeper into one of the most quietly corrosive forces behind hidden hatred, personal insecurity and projection. Insecurity does not always wear a hostile face. In fact, it often hides behind politeness, small talk, and even applause. But beneath the surface, it quietly simmers, fueling envy, bitterness, and sometimes outright resentment. What's worse is that it often has little to do with you and everything to do with how others see themselves in your presence. When someone hasn't confronted their own fears, failures, or feelings of inadequacy, those unresolved emotions don't just sit idle. They seek release. Often that release comes in the form of projection, redirecting inner discomfort outward, toward someone who seems to represent everything they wish they were or fear they will never become. This is not a conscious attack. It is a psychological reflex, but that doesn't make it any less damaging. Seneca wrote, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." This is especially true of insecurity. When someone feels insecure about their success, appearance, intelligence, or social standing, the presence of a person who appears confident, accomplished, or grounded can trigger a silent crisis. You unknowingly become a mirror, reflecting back their perceived shortcomings. Instead of confronting what the mirror shows them, they try to break it. It could be a coworker who suddenly grows cold when they see your progress, a friend who subtly downplays your wins, a family member who mocks your ambitions, not out of reason, but out of discomfort. This isn't about what you have done wrong. It's about how your very existence reminds them of their own unlived potential, unhealed wounds, or unmet expectations. And when they feel threatened, that internal storm needs a target. Often it's you. This is projection in its rawest form. It's easier for someone to resent your confidence than to admit they have abandoned their own. Continuing from the previous discussion about how others often reflect their own inner struggles, we realize that many times criticism directed at you is really just a way for others to avoid facing themselves. It's much easier for people to criticize your discipline than to admit their own complacency, and far easier for them to resent you for reminding them of what they have lost than to do the inner work needed to reclaim it. That silent discomfort slowly turns into resentment, and if left unchecked, resentment curdles into hatred. But here is what Stoic philosophy reminds us during these moments. Their projection is not your problem to fix. It's not your responsibility to shrink yourself so others don't feel small. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will gladly change. But if they simply criticize without clarity, I will hold to my path." You are not here to manage others' insecurities. You are here to walk your path with integrity, clarity, and grace, even if it unsettles those still unsure of themselves. Understanding the root of this hostility not only protects your peace, but also opens the door to compassion. When someone attacks you from a place of insecurity, what they really reveal is their own pain. While this never justifies their behavior, it does explain it. Recognizing this dynamic helps you depersonalize negativity. You stop absorbing it as a reflection of your worth and begin to see it as a reflection of their inner battle. This shift doesn't mean tolerating disrespect or enabling toxicity. Stoicism is not passive, it is principled. You can protect your peace while responding with understanding. You can set boundaries without bitterness. You can offer empathy without losing yourself. Sometimes the most powerful act of self-mastery is choosing not to retaliate when misunderstood, because you know the attack was never truly about you. The key. World is full of people carrying wounds they've never spoken of. When your light touches their shadow, something stirs inside. Some will be inspired, others will recoil. Your role isn't to manage their reactions, but to keep shining anyway. Because the more you honor your truth, the more you give others permission to face theirs. And those who are ready will ultimately remember this. Hate born from someone's insecurity is not a reflection of your character, but of the fear they have yet to heal. So stand tall, keep moving forward, and let your presence be proof that strength and stillness can coexist, even in the face of silent enemies. That is the Stoic way. Next, we explore another deep reason why people might secretly harbor resentment or even hate: lack of empathy and understanding. In a world guided by Stoic clarity, we'd like to imagine most people walk through life with empathy, compassion, and a sincere desire to understand each other. But reality, unfiltered and often harsh, shows us something different. A profound reason someone might hold resentment or hate toward you is not because of your behavior, but because they lack the capacity or willingness to step into another's experience. When people lack empathy, they see others not as fellow travelers, but as obstacles, threats, or even enemies. Empathy isn't just feeling what another feels. It's the ability to recognize motivations, understand context, and look beyond the surface. Without it, people misread your intentions, distort your words, and project emotions onto you that were never yours to carry. A moment of silence becomes arrogance. A boundary becomes rejection. Success becomes a personal attack. What started as a neutral or even kind exchange turns into quiet hostility, all because they failed to see beyond themselves. Continuing from our reflections on misunderstanding and its impact, we realize that this very lack of comprehension builds invisible walls that separate people from one another. When someone cannot imagine your perspective, they naturally assume the worst. They don't ask why you acted the way you did. Instead, they judge immediately. They don't wonder what you might be going through, but rather they reduce you to simple, fixed labels. And from there, resentment quietly begins to grow. Not because you wronged them, but because they lack the emotional clarity to see you accurately. This is not just a failure of feeling, but a failure of perception. Stoic philosophy teaches us that much of our suffering does not come from events themselves, but from the meaning we assign to those events. For those lacking empathy, that meaning is often distorted, sometimes wildly so. They tend to view the world in extremes, in clear black and white, either good or bad, for me or against me. Their judgments are quick, sharp but shallow. And because they never pause to reflect on the complexity within each person, they mistake subtle nuances for threats. This black and white lens creates a dangerous dynamic, where you can become the villain in a story you never wrote. This emotional rigidity often stems from self-centeredness. Those deeply absorbed in their own narrative rarely make space for yours. Narcissistic tendencies, though not always clinical, are common enough to fuel this kind of one-sided perception. When someone is consumed by their own needs, validation, and worldview, they lose the ability to genuinely connect. And when they cannot connect, they begin to devalue others. Your emotions become irrelevant, your struggles invisible, and your successes annoying or threatening. In that emotional void, coldness settles in, which to others feels indistinguishable from hatred. But here is where the Stoic perspective brings wisdom. Not every form of hostility deserves your reaction. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, you always have the choice to hold no opinion. This includes judgments born from ignorance or emotional blindness. When someone resents you because they don't understand you, that is not your burden. It reflects their limited capacity for clear perception. And knowing this gives you power, the power to respond with calmness instead of pain. Yet, Stoicism does not harden the heart. It refines it. Recognizing the source of resentment does not make you cynical. It makes you compassionate. When you understand that someone's coldness stems from their emotional limitations, not your faults, you no longer internalize the wound. Instead, you can choose your response. You can extend empathy where it is safe to do so, or you can set boundaries and walk away peacefully, without guilt, without revenge, and without needing to explain yourself to someone determined to misunderstand you. At its core, empathy is a bridge. Some will build that bridge with you. Others will tear it down before you even cross. Your role is to stay centered, to know the difference, and never compromise your own inner clarity just because someone refuses to see. This is not indifference. This is discipline. This is freedom. This is the Stoic way. Next, one of the most underestimated but deeply rooted sources of hidden hatred, competition or rivalry. What may start as a positive pursuit, a mutual drive for growth or excellence, can, over time, corrode into quiet hostility, envy, and a silent wish to see the other person fail. This is not the healthy kind of competition that sharpens two people and drives them to improve. This is the darker, more insidious version, fueled by comparison, insecurity, and unspoken resentment. Competition exists everywhere, in workplaces, social groups, even within families. At its best, it sharpens the mind, fuels discipline, and motivates us to push beyond our limits. Surely you still remember that in the previous section, we uncovered one of the deepest roots of hostility, envy disguised as competition. What starts as a noble drive for progress can easily be twisted when it's fueled by ego and unresolved wounds. When that desire to grow becomes entangled with pride, fear, or hidden pain, it no longer lifts us. It drags us into silent rivalry that corrodes human connection. Instead of focusing on personal progress, a person becomes consumed by someone else's success. Their question shifts from, "How can I improve?" to, "How can I bring them down?" And that shift is dangerously subtle. What's frightening is this kind of rivalry rarely shows up in blatant attacks. It often hides behind backhanded compliments, faint smiles, or quiet acts of sabotage. It's the colleague who congratulates you with eyes that don't match their words. The friend who disappears whenever life treats you kindly. The sibling who competes not from inspiration, but from a need to feel superior. Such rivalries don't need to be spoken aloud to be destructive. In fact, it's their silence that makes them so corrosive. Marcus Aurelius once warned that the craving for recognition and comparison erodes virtue. When competition becomes an obsession, it distorts how we see the world. Suddenly, it's not your growth that matters, but the perceived threat of someone else's light. You begin to view their success not as the result of effort, but as a personal injustice. You feel like what they have should have been yours. And if left unchecked, that belief can lead to slander, sabotage, or a deliberate attempt to tear them down. Not because they hurt you, but because their rise made you feel small. But Stoicism invites us to rise above that noise. It reminds us there's no honor in winning by harming others. True, strength is not measured by how many people you surpass, but by how faithfully you follow your own values, even when the road is steep, even when others are applauded and you are overlooked. Epictetus taught that the only competition worth pursuing is the one against your former self. To be better today than you were yesterday, not better than your neighbor, your friend, or your so-called rival, just better than who you used to be. If someone secretly resents you for what you've achieved, understand this. It's not your success that offends them. It's what your success reflects about their own doubts. In that moment, you become a mirror, not of arrogance, but of the qualities they believe they lack. And the answer is not to dim your light. The answer is to hold your posture with grace, not pride, with clarity, not apology. There is space for everyone to grow. Someone else's success is not your loss. It is simply their path unfolding. Once you truly understand this, you no longer feel the urge to compete with bitterness. You learn to admire without envy, to strive without hatred, to stand tall without stepping on anyone's shoulders. That is the kind of strength Stoicism teaches. Not a strength that conquers by force, but one that triumphs through self-mastery. So if you ever find yourself the target of someone else's silent rivalry, just keep walking. Let your actions speak louder than their projections. Compete with no one but who you were yesterday. And when others try to drag you into their silent war, offer them something far rarer, your peace. Because in the end, true power does not crush its rivals. It outgrows them, quietly, steadily, unshaken. Continuing from the previous reflection, we now uncover another silent truth. Sometimes, doing nothing wrong is enough to be seen as a threat, not because you attacked anyone, but simply because you dared to be different. And that very difference becomes a mirror, forcing others to confront themselves. Now let's peel back one more layer, a deeper, more discreet root of resentment. The invisible weight of social expectations. Have you ever felt pressured living in a society that celebrates sameness, where career paths follow pre-written scripts, where relationships are bound by traditional norms, and where success is defined by checking off a list of standards rather than living a meaningful life? Then you chose a different path. Maybe you left a stable job to pursue something that made you feel truly alive. Maybe you built relationships that don't fit the mold. Maybe your thoughts, your actions, your way of being confuse people, not because you intend to provoke, but because you're living in alignment with your truth. And that alone, your authentic existence, is enough to make others uncomfortable. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you shattered what they always assumed was right. That discomfort isn't always personal, it's systemic. When your choices challenge values that others have inherited without question, they are forced to re-examine the very foundations of their lives. And if those foundations are built more on tradition than on truth, your sincerity becomes a threat. You didn't attack them, but your refusal to fit in becomes a quiet confrontation, as if you're holding up a mirror to the things they've never dared to question. The philosopher Seneca once said, "It is not the man who has too little who is poor, but the one who craves more." In the same spirit, it's not those who leave the old path who are lost, it's those who never dared to take a turn. And yet society reverses this truth. It teaches us to fear difference, to distrust the unconventional, and to protect the majority rule even if it means sacrificing our unique identity. But a Stoic understands, inner peace doesn't come from fitting in. It comes from living in accordance with your values. This life is yours. You owe no one your obedience, not your family, not your culture, not the people who say they only want what's best for you. True strength lies in choosing authenticity over applause, in choosing meaning over acceptance. And yes, some people will quietly dislike you simply because you live honestly, not because you're wrong, but because you remind them of all the things they never dared to become. So keep walking your path with quiet strength. Let others cling to their expectations if they must, but don't let them pull you back into their comfort zone. You were not born to live a life written by someone else. You were born to live deeply, freely, and fully, with the wisdom and courage of your own soul. That is freedom in the Stoic spirit. That is true power. They don't see me. They don't care. Maybe they only value him or her, but never me. These are the unspoken whispers echoing in the minds of many, a quiet emotional undercurrent that, if left unaddressed, becomes fertile ground for simmering resentment. As Epicurus once said, the acknowledgement of one's efforts is often more satisfying than the reward itself. So what happens when that acknowledgement never arrives? The need doesn't just vanish. It transforms into subtle comparisons, quiet, jealousy, or even open contempt toward those who receive the recognition. Even when you've done nothing wrong, someone who feels invisible may begin to resent you simply because your presence reminds them of their own perceived insignificance. But here lies the Stoic truth. Recognition is subjective. What makes one person feel seen can make another feel ignored. Some constantly seek validation. Others carry invisible wounds from years of being overlooked. When you understand this, it becomes clear. Their resentment is rarely ever truly about you. More often, it's about what you represent, the fulfillment they yearn for, the applause they never received, or the affirmation they silently beg for but never voice. This is why communication matters. A simple compliment, a moment of gratitude, or even a nod of respect can shift the entire dynamic of a relationship. But if that recognition never comes, if someone remains locked in bitterness, remember, it is not your responsibility to heal them. You are not required to shrink yourself so others can feel bigger. You are not obligated to sacrifice your peace to fill someone else's emotional void. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject. Likewise, the approval of others means nothing if it comes at the cost of your inner peace. You were not born to chase endless validation, nor should you feel guilty when others project their unmet needs onto you. Because when someone resents you for being seen, it's not a reflection of your failure. It's a reflection of their own internal disconnection. Whether it stems from insecurity, jealousy, poor communication, or long-standing emotional wounds, their reaction reveals more about their inner world than your outward behavior. You simply became the nearest symbol of a deeper, unresolved pain. In moments like this, boundaries are not just protection, they are compassion. Not only for yourself, but for the other person too. You cannot grow if you're constantly being pulled into someone else's emotional storm. Protect your energy. Be kind but firm. Be understanding, but do not absorb. Offer support when it's welcomed, but never lose your clarity trying to fix someone who resents the light you carry. At the end of the day, Focus on building relationships rooted in honesty, mutual respect, and emotional wellness. Let go of the need to be liked by everyone, because some will dislike you simply for reminding them of the parts of themselves they've tried to forget. And that's not cruelty. That's just truth. So continue to show up with integrity. Continue doing excellent work even when no one notices. Because a life built on virtue, stillness, resilience, and self-awareness doesn't need applause to be meaningful. You weren't born to be everyone's favorite. You were born to be free. Let that be enough. If this message resonated with you, consider subscribing to stay grounded with us on this journey. Share your thoughts or simply comment "inner peace" to mark this moment of reflection. And when you're ready, the next video awaits to guide you deeper into clarity and calm.